We are back for the conclusion to our epic series on Joshua that has taken us, I believe, from September all the way here into November with a little bit of time off while I was traveling. And once we are wrapped up with that, I'm going to go ahead and I will share with you some pictures that I took from my side trip to Istanbul. Next week, we'll be back together and I will share a presentation on the trip to Ghana with the Wabash Pastoral Leadership Program. So, with that, before we jump into, so we are going to be on the back side of the handout that says Joshua Promises Kept Christian Reception. So, it's the same handout we started last week, and we will be on the back page of that. Or maybe we will if I can open the silly thing up. Any questions from last week or anything still kind of rolling around in anybody's mind on what we touched on before? Okay, I will take that to mean that I have explained everything in exquisite detail. Fantastic. So, let us jump to a place that the New Testament picks up on from Joshua here. And this is a little bit of a longer passage from Joshua, so we'll split it up a little bit. But let's turn to Joshua chapter 2. And Nick, if you could give us verses 1 through 7, Renee 8 through 14, and Carol 15 through 21. We'll just split that into 3 there. All right, Nick, when you're ready, go ahead and get us started, please.
I was muted, I'm sorry. Then came Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, Go and view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and spent the night there. The king of Jericho was told, Some Israelites have come here tonight to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come only to search out the whole land. But the woman took the 2 men and hid them. And then she said, True, the men came, but I did not know where they came from. And when it was time to close the gate at dark, the men went out. Where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you can't overtake them. She had, however, brought them up to the roof and hidden them with the stalk of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men pursued them on the way to Jordan as far as the fords. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut.
Where they went to sleep, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt in the fear before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on earth below. Now then, since I have dealt kindly with you, swear to me by the Lord that you in turn will deal kindly with my family. Give me a sign of good faith that you will spare my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. The men said to her, our life for yours. If you do not tell this business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land.
Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the outer side of the city wall, and she resided within the wall itself. She said to them, go toward the hill country, so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Hide yourself there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go on your way. The men said to her, we will be released from this oath that you have made us swear to you. If we invade the land and you do not tie this crimson cord in the window through which you let us down, you do not gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers and all your family. If any of you go out of the doors of your house into the street, they shall be responsible for their own death, and we shall be innocent. But if a hand is laid upon any of you who are within the house, we shall bear the responsibility for their death. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be released from this oath that you have made us to swear to you. She said, according to your words, so be it. She sent them away and they departed. Then she tied the crimson cord in the window.
So the only other time we hear from Rahab in the book of Joshua is in the account of when they sack Jericho, and they say they did find Rahab and her family, and they did not harm them because they had sworn this oath. So Rahab is a relatively small character in the book of Joshua, but the New Testament reception is kind of interesting. Tom, if you could get ready for us, Matthew 1, verse 5. Kristen, if you could be ready with Hebrews 11:31. And Mark, if you could be on deck with James 2, 24 through 26.
Okay, Matthew chapter 1, verse 5. And Salmon, the father of Boaz, by Rahab, and Boaz, the father of Obed, by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David.
So Rahab is King David's, let's see, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, maybe? She's a direct ancestor of David, which also makes her a direct ancestor of Jesus.
Hebrews 11, verse 31 says, by faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish within those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace.
Okay, so we again get Rahab, and we get a reference to her story there. And Mark, what do we get in the epistle of James there?
See that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. Likewise, was not Rahab the prostitute also justified by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out by another road? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is also dead.
So again, Rahab is not a huge character in the book of Joshua. She gets 3 references in the New Testament. Joshua himself gets 2. So what do we make of that? What are your thoughts on why Rahab gets 50% more press in the New Testament than Joshua?
Well, if it wasn't for her, that lineage would have never happened. If
So yeah,
family would have
definitely
been
there's a
killed, if she or her family would have been killed, those great great grandchildren or that lineage would have never happened.
yeah, so definitely she is a key person in the lineage of major Old Testament people, and then reaching all the way down to Jesus. So yeah, anybody who's one of Jesus' family members is probably going to get some press. Joshua, not a direct ancestor of Jesus. What else are we thinking? Why else might Rahab have been of particular interest to the New Testament authors?
She didn't question the fact that God was going to give their land to the Israelites. It's like she knew it was going to happen. So she did a bargain, had the chance to do a bargain to save herself and her family.
So she recognized, she was somebody from outside Israel who recognized the truth of what God was doing, or recognized that this was the true God.
Yep.
So she was, maybe somebody who just by nationality shouldn't kind of be part of what God is up to, yet God works through her. And we definitely see that in the New Testament, with people, and very often what we see in the Gospels is this idea of the people who should know best, the people who should be able to see the kingdom arriving in Jesus the most easily, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the people who have all the tools they should need to spot that. Often, not all the time, but often they don't get what Jesus is up to, whereas the sinners, the tax collectors, the prostitutes are the ones who sit at the table with Jesus. They're the ones who start to get what it is that Jesus is doing. So I think maybe there's that idea as well, of the people you least expect to get it, to see what God is up to. They are the ones who do see it. These spies, they didn't go to the priests in the temple in Jericho. They didn't go to the royalty. They found a lady who was figuratively living on the edge of the society, but also literally, she's right on the edge of the city. It says she lived in the walls. And I remember last year seeing at one of the Spanish missions outside of San Antonio, it was a big walled compound, and actually within the walls there were rooms built into it. So she wasn't living in a pile of rubble. But I think that's very much in line with a lot of what goes on in the New Testament. It's the last people you would look to as the examples are the ones God is at work in.
Would her story have been like almost like a conversion story then? Like she converted to believing in the one true God after seeing the Israel Israelites coming in and just and hearing that they destroyed all these other kings and all these other lands. And then she says, your God is the one true God, where she might have been believing something else.
I'm not sure.
Oh.
Some of it, I think, would have to depend on how you would define conversion. So obviously, she does end up marrying a man from the people of Israel. I do not know if whatever standards or ceremony there was to mark officially converting to the religion of Israel. I don't know if she went through that. In the New Testament, of course, it would be baptism. So I don't know if, I don't know, I guess it depends on your definition of conversion. I would say without question, it's a story of confession. She confesses that he is the true God.
Okay.
So I think we can say that with certainty. As far as conversion, there's probably some things going on with that maybe we don't have good sources on, but the fact that she becomes part of the lineage of King David. She has definitely embraced some significant parts of being a part of Israel. So we could say that.
Oh, okay.
Any other thoughts on Rahab and the amount of attention she gets in the New Testament, which again is not huge, but she does get more than Joshua. So, last thing I wanted to touch on here, according to biblical scholar Jerome Crouch, traditionally, the Christian community has seen Joshua as foundational for basic doctrines such as election, predestination, and divine grace. How might we briefly define each of these? And based on what we have studied from Joshua, which we have studied pretty in depth, what do we see within Joshua that we could point to and say, okay, yes, we can see where people might get that idea from? So the idea of election, as far as scripture is concerned, how would we briefly understand what that is?
Appointed by God.
Yep, appointed by God. Uh, for what? Why would God bother to appoint a people or a person or what have you?
To build his kingdom.
Right? So it's for a specific purpose. For Israel, it's to be a light to the nations. For Christianity, it is to build the kingdom. So chosen by God for a specific purpose. In what way do we see that idea at work in Joshua? That Israel is the elect. They are people chosen by God for a particular purpose.
That would go all the way back to the time of Abraham, I would say. When it was determined then that he would have offsprings, as many of as stars in heaven, and they would also eventually have their own land.
But even before the promise of land, what were Abraham's offspring supposed to do?
Why?
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, say that again, please.
Why?
Yeah, they're supposed to be fruitful and multiply, and in you I will bless all the families of the earth. So Israel is selected for that purpose of bringing God's blessing into all the earth, to be a light to the nations. And so Tom pointed out that, yeah, we hear that first with the promise to Abraham in Genesis 12. Where do we see that idea at work in Joshua? Or maybe we don't. And maybe Jerome Crouch is off the mark here.
Well, doesn't God tell Joshua, you will do this and this will happen? And, he makes it very clear that, God's in control. If you listen to me, you're going to easily overwhelm, even though the odds might be against you, you're going to easily overwhelm the people that currently are in the promised land.
Right. And they will overwhelm those people because God has chosen them to live in that land. God has made them the elect. So I think we see a lot of it in that whole idea of, in Joshua, God is keeping the promises to the people. So because they have been chosen for this mission, God is equipping them for the mission by having a place to live. Election is not something we tend to spend a lot of time with theologically. I think as Americans, it kind of grates on us that there's this seemingly arbitrary choice of you people are the chosen people. And whether that is Israel, whether that is the church, whatever it is, that doesn't always sit well. But I think about it in terms of it's not necessarily, election does not necessarily mean entitlement. It doesn't mean, well, you get singled out for special treatment, you get all the good things. I think we can look over the course of history and see that that probably, I don't think we can make the case that that has been the reality for Israel. I don't know that it necessarily is the case for the church, certainly anymore. But I do think that idea of being chosen for a special responsibility, I think about this from time to time with respect to where the church is at in the United States, that it is maybe not in the position of privilege and influence that it once was. However, I think maybe, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his son. And maybe that idea of election applies to the church. It's not that we are blessed because we will get all these good things or what have you. God loves the whole world, but God has raised, or God has set aside, I should say, some people to a specific purpose, or some people are held to a different standard. And maybe that is us within the church. God has set us aside and said, your role is to keep building the kingdom. Your role is to witness to what I am doing. And so I find that idea of election, again, one that we don't usually spend a lot of time with. I find it helpful in thinking about who we are as the church in the 21st century. So there. I know I have three things on this list here. Let's jump down to divine grace. Where in this book, with so much violence and conquest, why would this biblical scholar say, this is a book where we develop the doctrine of divine grace?
It's difficult to see with all the bloodshed that went on.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe a piece of it is in that God has said to Israel, I will do this for you. And it's not because they're so great, it's because God promised it. It's because that is who God is. So maybe in like broad strokes, I could see that as grace. I think Rahab shows grace. She takes in these people who everybody in town is hunting for and wanting to kill, and she says, based on who your God is, I'm going to take this action to help you.
And she's also the recipient then of grace because she and her family are spared.
Right. Well, I don't know if that's grace or if that is justification by works. She and her family get spared because she did this good thing. And I mean, I think you could see both in there, but
Well, wasn't that literally called for by God to let Rahab go, or did Joshua make that decision? I can't remember specifically.
yeah, I think that was the decision made by the spies and by Joshua.
Okay. Then I rescind it. If it didn't come directly from God, then it's not divine grace.
Yeah, it's hard.
But why, if not, why her to just happen to be the one to take these two in? Seeing as she is part of the lineage.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean,
It
I could
wasn't
see
divine
that.
grace.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that being grace, and I think at that point, grace and election kind of overlap in that there is a there is grace within election. You know, why are these people chosen? God's grace. So I could see that maybe there is grace in God's choice of Rahab, God's choice of the people. And since I'm among friends here, I'm going to go ahead and pick up a rock and chuck it right at the hornet's nest here because I know how much Lutherans love this last one. Predestination. Um, how how might we define predestination?
It's meant to happen. We have no control.
Mhm.
It's all figured out ahead of time. Um, do we do we see anything in Joshua that could be the basis of this doctrine that Lutherans have not embraced?
Sure, because everything was predetermined before the battles even began. I mean, God told Joshua that you do this and you will win. That's predestined. There's
Mm,
no reason to be, it's going to be rigged, so to speak. I mean, you can't lose.
yeah, I could see that. Now let me pull a Tom on you here though. Is that predestination or is that Deuteronomistic theology? They obeyed God, therefore they were successful.
Boy,
I'm
And like
okay
I said,
with that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said I'm okay with that thought.
And again, this was just something I saw in one of the resources I used, and I thought in terms of Christian reception, I just thought it was interesting for a little bit of discussion. Yeah, predestination. I will just say briefly, I cannot get on board with. From what I understand, it's kind of the idea of, well, if God is all knowing, God knows what we're going to do. So would that not mean, I guess the part where I have trouble with it is it equates God's knowledge of what we're going to do with God deciding what we're going to do. I thought Genesis was pretty clear on that idea that God definitely tells us what choice we should make, but we as people have the agency to make a different choice. And my thought would be foreknowledge does not equal predestination. Um, and
The only way I could say that it was is if you go all the way back to Abraham again and with the promise and the promise of the land. So the promise of land was made to Abraham without any strings attached.
mhm,
So therefore that fact was predestined.
mm, yeah, I kind of see where you could go with that.
That doesn't mean
Uh,
I disagree with you about the Calvinistic bit of
mhm,
God is uh, knights certain people for salvation and others for damnation. I think that
right.
that's totally ridiculous. A
Um,
step further than what you were saying.
yeah. Um, I am. This probably will not come as a big surprise, given that I am a pastor of a Lutheran church. Um, I am not not enamored of John Calvin as a theologian, and I will leave it at that.
Yeah, and as a prior Catholic, I even have more of a bone to grind with him than you, because I think those two groups are probably in the realm of Christianity, are probably near 180-degree opposites. Maybe perhaps with the Baptist too, but it's pretty close.
Right. Well, I actually saw physical evidence of that in my trip to Ghana, in that one of the places we visited was first built by the Portuguese, and then it was taken over by the Dutch. So the Catholics were there first, and then the Reformed people got there later. And I won't spoil the presentation next week too much, but there's a place where you can actually see the disdain one group had for the other. All of which in a context that kind of makes me think all of them had a lot of disdain for God, but we'll get there next week. Do you feel like studying Joshua, which again I think we've done in pretty good depth, does that offer us any wisdom or insight on Jesus' ministry? And I'm not looking for a specific answer here. I'm really curious what you guys think.
They both fulfilled their mission.
And did so with God's presence with them all along. With Joshua, I will fight this battle for you, and it's Jesus full of the Holy Spirit did this. Jesus full of the Holy Spirit did that.
You think that has something to do with the same name for both of them?
I'm sure it could. I mean, names are always meaningful. Names are always significant in Scripture. Yeah, I wouldn't argue with you over it. That'll preach.
I would say another insight would be Joshua would offer a point of contrast, particularly with respect to harem. So with harem, act was obviously practiced as in Joshua, based on basically an order from God, whereas in the New Testament it would have been, I would think, if you're talking about other people or people from surrounding areas, it would be to go out and bring the gospel to them. So it would be to evangelize as opposed to euthanize.
Or simply out of the Sermon on the Mount, love your enemies.
So it's a point of contrast, or as a different, at a different time in the continuum of man's relationship with God.
And in the New Testament, Jesus was coming to bring people together, not to conquer one group or the other. He wanted, the Gentiles to come into the fold, and everybody else. It wasn't all about just taking over anymore. It was just, okay, now we have to love your neighbor as yourself and love your enemies. And so yeah, he was not wanting to just take over,
right,
everybody to live together.
Right. And particularly in Joshua, there are all those injunctions against do not marry the people who are already here. That will impact our identity, or impact our ability to maintain an identity. And then Jesus comes along and says, go out and make disciples of every nation.
All nations.
Bring all the people, regardless of background, into what God is doing. So yeah, another point of contrast. I think that's a good way to describe it. That idea of we are struggling to maintain a specific identity, and one of the ways we're going to do that is not intermarrying, versus our identity comes from what Jesus has done on the cross, and that has the ability to cut across any of the lines that we would usually use to distinguish ourselves. So yeah, sometimes having those points of contrast really highlights things that matter.
And so you're saying that the more all those rules about not intermarrying was to keep the Israelites completely separate until the day that Jesus united the world through God. And after that, it was kind of what, free for all, or is that what made it so difficult for the Jews of Jesus' time to go, wait a minute, how come now everybody else gets these
Right.
blessings? Is that
So
what we're
I
saying?
think for a long time there was an emphasis within Israel on maintaining a distinctive identity, and a lot of that is contained in the Torah. A lot of those things are laws that are given to kind of help you stand out from everybody else. God wants the rest of the world to turn and look at Israel and say, there's something intriguing, there's something fascinating about their way of life, so that people would, that would get people's attention, and they would want to know more about this God. And by the time you get to the time of Jesus, some of the things that the people would do to maintain their identity, such as Sabbath observance. So, can we heal on the Sabbath? Well, yeah, Jesus fights with people a lot about that. Interpretation of Scripture. You have heard it said, but I am telling you. So several of those points, and there's one other that I always forget, but there were kind of three big topics that were in play in that era, and we see them all over the Gospels. That land has been overrun multiple times by multiple different empires. They talk about the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They're lost because the Assyrians picked up groups of people and just spread them all over. So they said, we're just going to kind of take everybody and mash them all together, so that the only identity they know they have is Assyrian. And so that idea of maintaining that identity is really near and dear to, I believe, to what Israel sees their mission as. As Christians, we see the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus as a turning point in history, where God has said, now is the time. Kind of, Abraham and his family have been stewards of this blessing for all this time. And God has always said, through these people, Jesus being one of these people, I want to bring that blessing to the whole earth. So Jesus is the one who kind of turns that corner. And then the identity becomes a person claimed by Christ rather than a person born into this particular nation. So certainly from a Christian perspective, it is very hard for us to make sense of that apart from Jesus.
Okay.
Any last thoughts on Joshua? I think I remember telling everybody up front many weeks ago this was not going to be simple, and I believe I have kept that promise. Just any last observations or thoughts?
One thing on this study overall of Joshua, I have to say, I really think for me, this was, enjoyed and got way more out of it. The way that you did it was a little different than the other books, where you introduced the themes and we got the themes, and then we read, serious passages of Joshua in total and applied the themes to that.
Mhm.
For me, I found that very helpful. And
Okay.
I like reading, the book. I like reading, segments together rather than just verses here and there. But the way you did it this time with the introducing the themes and then reading more text, for me, I all in, and that was really helpful, and I think it was excellent.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. Was that helpful to other folks? Because very often we'll go through go through beginning to end, derive the themes and so on. And this time, what we did was we did kind of the usual setup work that we do with where do we think the book came from, when do we think it was written, what was going on. Then we looked at the themes, and then we read through the story and said, let's see where these themes pop up. Was that helpful to folks? Is that something I want to keep in mind going forward?
Mm-hmm.
I liked it too.
Okay. Sorry, I just did something I very rarely do. My pen stopped working because it ran out of ink, and I threw it away instead of just putting it back down on the table. So I'm very proud of myself for that. Okay, I will keep that in mind going forward. Anything about the way, kind of the way we set up and arranged the study that maybe could be done differently? Okay, all right. I don't want to give people too much time to come up with things that they didn't like. So that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some pictures of my trip to Istanbul. And then next week we will be back, and the whole session will be devoted to the trip to Ghana with the Wabash Pastoral Leadership Program. So let me go ahead and get my pictures pulled up here. And while I am getting those pulled up, has anyone else here traveled to Istanbul or traveled to Turkey before?
Yep.
Okay, very good. What were your impressions?
Was fabulous to step back in time like that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, and not just a step back, kind of like one time, but just the layers of history that are all kind of stacked on top of each other there.
But yeah,
All right. Okay, is everybody able to see the slide here? It's a map.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And if you have something you want to throw out there or a question you want to ask, just unmute yourself and ask, because right now I can't see the list of people. So if you click the hand raise button or something, I won't know you're raising your hand. So just for point of reference, Istanbul sits right here on the Bosporus, which comes from the ancient Greek word for the ox ford. Because I guess maybe at some point people brought cattle across there. Anyway, it sits right here between Europe and Asia. So after being in Ghana down here, I took an overnight flight across North Africa up to Istanbul. And Istanbul airport is way over up here, but the kind of center of the city has these three lobes of land that stick out. There is the Fatih area, which is over here, and this is the oldest part of the city. This was where the Romans and then the Byzantines set up shop, and eventually that got taken over by the Turks. Up here, one of the neighborhoods up here is the Karakoy neighborhood, and this is where some of the higher end stuff is up here. And then over here, down here is where we spent some time. This is the Kadikoy neighborhood, which is much more people actually live here and go about their business over here. Over here is much more geared towards visitors and tourists. And then this is the Bosporus right here. So this and this are Europe. The Golden Horn is just a little finger of water that sticks up there. It doesn't go anywhere, or it doesn't lead anywhere, I should say. And over here, this is Asia. So one city on 2 continents.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So yeah, so on this trip, I was able to hit up 3 continents. So went from Africa to Europe and then across to Asia and back. So the first place I went after I got there was to the Grand Bazaar. So you get to walk through this very imposing arched entrance here, and you can see the Ottoman emblem up there. And it is the world's largest covered market, from what I understand, and it's pretty nice in there. It's busy. There's lots of shops. I did very little shopping because I'm not really a big shopping kind of person, but it's big and it's cool and it's ancient. So I went and checked it out, and they have Turkish coffee and baklava. So of course I
Oh,
got some
wow.
Turkish coffee and baklava.
Oh, baklava, so good.
Oh, just wait till later. And the Grand Bazaar sits right next to the Saminiye Mosque, which was the first one that I visited, and the stained glass is very different from any of the mosques that I have seen in the Middle East or in the United States. So I think that is one of the hallmarks of an Ottoman style mosque is the stained glass. They very much kind of absorbed that from Europe, as well as the arches and the domes, but particularly I think the stained glass is one of the distinguishing features. And this is just a streetscape there in the Fatih area of Istanbul. You're never far from the water, so I just looked down the street and there's water. One of the things that I thought was interesting is I could see cargo ships lined up out to the horizon. And they said that the reason for that is the Bosporus Straits are so narrow that half the day they only allow traffic going one way, and then half the day they allow traffic going the other way. So it's the only connection between the Black Sea and the rest of the world's oceans. So it's very heavily trafficked, and they can only have traffic going one way at a time. So there's always a line. And so I hit up the Grand Bazaar. So I hit up one of the big tourist spots. And then I headed to the Basilica Cistern, which is another of the big time tourist spots. And it was originally constructed as part of the water supply for Constantinople. And you can see in the picture, there's still a little bit of water in there, which I think is just for show. But typically it would be filled with water to supply water to the city. For those who are James Bond fans, this is where Sean Connery took a boat through in From Russia with Love. So they had a lot more water in it when they filmed that, but this is where he took a boat. And it's huge. It does look like a basilica under there. It's several hundred feet long by a couple hundred feet wide. And in the construction, they were very eco-friendly. It was a lot of recycling. So a lot of columns that were taken from other buildings, and a lot of them were fancy. You can see your Corinthian column here, and another one with a fancy capital there, the nice brick arches and domes. It was beautiful as well as functional. One of the things they recycled was this giant Medusa head, which was placed upside down in an attempt to negate the Medusa power there. So I just thought that was interesting.
Now,
Oh, and
you were mentioning Constantinople, which was the eastern seat of the church along with Rome until about 1500, I guess. Is this basilica, was that part of like the Eastern popes, or is any of that left? Or has it all been destroyed or converted to mosque? What's the state of what the basilicas were when Constantinople was the seat of the Eastern Church?
So this underground reservoir here, which now has an art gallery in it, they have various art things. I just wanted to show that to people. You can see some green artwork there. This is not actually a basilica. They just refer to it as that because it has the very graceful columns and arches. This is a reservoir. It was never a house of worship, but most of what had been built as houses of worship were converted to mosques. I saw a couple of churches while I was there, but very few. So there is not a lot left of the kind of the Byzantine Christian influence that was there. So, for example, the Hagia Sophia, or the Hagia Sophia in Turkish, was for a long time the world's largest church, and then it was converted to a mosque. So I'll show you the inside of that in a minute. I put this picture in here because there are cats everywhere. Cats run the town. They wander the streets. They're all over the place. So now you know. So this is the inside of the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Divine Wisdom, which was built around the year 500. And in 1453, when the city was taken over by the Ottoman Turks, I believe what they said was the city fell on a Wednesday, and the Sultan said, I want the Hagia Sophia ready for prayers on Friday. So his people came in and turned it into a mosque, and it's been rebuilt a few times and redecorated and so on. In the early 1920s, when the modern state of Turkey came into being, it was created as an officially secular country, and in that spirit, the Hagia Sophia, along with a couple other places, historical and architectural significance, were turned into museums. And this was a museum until 2 years ago, when Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, who seems to think of himself as the new sultan, said, we're turning it back into a mosque. So there were two entrance lines. One was if you're coming for worship, and then you come in and you can be down on the ground floor here, and you can see here's the pulpit over here. And then the other line is for visitors, and we could walk around this gallery on the second floor, which is probably 40 feet up in the air. I've been in big churches before, and this place is enormous. It's mind blowing how big this building is, particularly to remember it was built 1,500 years ago.
Wow.
And so they have uncovered some of the mosaics that were in there. So, originally the place was really opulently decorated. This is along kind of the back of the church. So this is the kind of the gallery on the second floor there. It's basically a big hallway, but yet you can see it is clad in marble and mosaics. And it's really beautiful and huge. And again, they have uncovered some of the mosaics. So you see Jesus there in the middle. And let's see. I'm not remembering who these people are, and I'm not really able to make out what the crazy Byzantine writing is. They changed how they wrote some of the letters compared to ancient Greek. So those were the places I hit up the first day. The next day, I took a Bosporus boat cruise, which was really nice. Got to see a lot of the city. They said some of the most expensive real estate in the world are the waterfront houses on the Bosporus. They said that the cheapest one recently sold for, I thought they might have said $20 million, because there's not very many of them. But this is kind of a view of that Fatih area, so you can see the Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque there. We were going north toward the Black Sea. We went by the Dolmabahce Palace. This is the new Ottoman palace built in the 1850s. And we went between the fortress on the Asian side, and this is the Rumeli Fortress on the European side. And as they encroached on Constantinople, the Ottomans built these two fortresses across the strait from each other at the narrowest part so they could control the waterway. And they called the European side Rumeli because they referred to the Byzantines as Romans. So Rumeli, Roman.
Mm.
And we went underneath the first bridge across the straits, which was built in the 70s. So you get on the bridge in Europe and get off the bridge in Asia, or vice versa. So then down, not real far from the Hagia Sophia, is what used to be the circus. It used to be the racetrack. And the Roman or the Byzantine emperors put up these three obelisks. This one they imported from Egypt. This is part of one that was taken from Delphi in Greece by the Temple of Apollo. And then this one was constructed by one of the Byzantine emperors, but in this square, which is actually a rectangle, they have these three obelisks down there, which is kind of cool. And those sit right in front of the Blue Mosque, which we'll see in a moment. I walked down to the Topkapi Palace, which was the original Ottoman palace that they built shortly after taking over the city. And a friend of my father's who is from Istanbul said, one of the things to note when you go into this palace is, yes, it's nice because it's a palace, but it is not nearly as fancy as what you would see in palaces in Europe. And he said, I think it has to do with the fact that these were nomadic people and they weren't really quite sure what to do now that they had a place to kind of settle down, and they're kind of accustomed to living a more Spartan lifestyle. So even the palace is a little more Spartan. It's a little less over the top than you would see at like Versailles or Buckingham Palace or somewhere like that. Well, this was the main gate. And then you walk into the first courtyard, and there are 4 or 5 courtyards. The place just goes on and on and on. But you see, it's nice. They had an entire wall of that courtyard was kitchens. They had one whole kitchen, not just a room, but there's a couple of rooms dedicated just to sweets. The Ottomans had a big time sweet tooth, so to keep the imperial household supplied with enough sweet stuff, they had a couple of these giant rooms dedicated just to making sweets.
Huh.
They also had a big long exhibit hall dedicated just to imperial coffee sets. So they were big into fancy coffee sets, and you can see made out of gold, made out of silver, got some ivory in there, fancy enamel work. Yeah, coffee was a big deal. Each member of the imperial household had their own coffee maker, not like they had a Keurig. They had a person whose job it was to make coffee for that member of the royal family. So chief coffee maker to the Sultan was a job. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the movie Inside Out, but there's a part where the anger character says, "These are my kind of people." That's what I was thinking as I was going through this exhibition hall with all these coffee pots. What
You
you see
liked
on
the Turkish coffee, Pastor?
Oh yes.
Have you ever
Drank
had
a
it
lot
before?
of it. Oh yes. I was very much looking forward to it. So I did bring some home. So I've been enjoying that. And um, Turkish coffee, as far as I can tell, is the same as Greek coffee, which is the same as Arabic coffee, which is the same as Israeli coffee. But don't try telling any of them that. The one that is really different is Saudi coffee, because Saudi coffee, they leave the beans kind of green and they just kind of break them up coarsely, so they're like chunks floating in your coffee or whatever. But that's neither here nor there. The second courtyard, so you go through another big gate, and the first place you come to is this building on the left. This was the Sultan's audience chamber. So he has a big, huge, imposing couch that he would sit on, and then people would kind of sit a little bit lower than him in this building here. And one of the sultans built an imperial library right next to the audience chamber. So that was a pretty cool building. And then they had the interior of a lot of these pavilions looks kind of like this. There's really cool tile work and very nice stained glass, but there's not a ton of stuff that's, covered in gold, and it's not, brocade fabrics and tapestries on the walls and everything. So stuff is very nice, but it's also somewhat restrained on the inside. So they had several of these rooms kind of like this, and many of them were named for different places within the Ottoman Empire. There was the Baghdad Pavilion and the Damascus Pavilion, and so on. Any one of which I thought were kind of cool places to hang out. They have a great view from the palace, so looking across to that northern lobe of land there. This here is the Galata Tower, which was built by, they said, the Genoese. There were some Italian people who were in Constantinople at some point, and they built this watchtower. So that's another one of the landmarks. And then on the grounds of the palace, I mentioned I'd seen a couple of churches. This is one of them. This is the Hagia Irene, the Church of Holy Peace, and it's just kind of sat. It was never turned into a mosque. It's never been restored, but you can go inside it, and it's pretty, Spartan on the inside because it's never been restored. But you can very clearly see the cross up at the front. So I just thought that was interesting. That was right actually on the palace grounds, and it was just kind of left as is. The next day, we went across over into the up into that northern section of Istanbul, and it's just a streetscape from up there, just to give you an idea what that part of town looks like. And we did go to an art museum. They had an exhibit on mathematics in art, and I'm not that big of a student of art. I took pictures of several things, but this one I thought was just the most interesting to me. So I put it in here, and this is a well-known painting by an Ottoman painter, and it is a elderly man checking out his pets, his bunch of turtles. And my friend who I met there said that he fully expects to become this guy one day. And at this museum, they had, wouldn't you know it, more coffee stuff on exhibit. So as you can see, they take coffee seriously. Then I went to the Blue Mosque, which is, again, one of the big destinations. It's one of those, if you go to Istanbul, you got to go there. And this sits kind of across a park from the Hagia Sophia. And this is in the courtyard of the Blue Mosque. So you can see it's big, it's imposing. And on the inside, it is pretty stunning. You can see all the blue tile work, hence the Blue Mosque. And the Ottoman style stained glass and the half domes around the outside with the full dome, which I guess I don't have a picture of, the full dome in the center. I got a picture of the pulpit here. I thought that would be a pretty cool place to get up and preach from. And again, the stained glass is nice. these pillars are enormous. They've got to be 12 or 15 feet in diameter. The place is really huge, but you can see the beauty of the painting and the tile work, and yeah, it's a cool place. We did hit up the Turkish bath, the hammam. This particular one was built in 1580, the same year that the Book of Concord was published. And I know you're disappointed I didn't get any pictures of me actually in the Turkish bath. But this is the kind of the lobby area where after you're done with the steam and the hot water and all that good stuff, they send you out here to drink tea.
Wow.
And then I did take public transportation. Rode the trolley around in Istanbul, and then part of their public transportation is the ferry across from, and it can take you all around those different points of land there. And you get out here and you pay a princely sum of maybe $1.25, if that, to go across. So here we are in Kadikoy on the Asian side, and this neighborhood just had a really nice vibe to it. Every street was interesting shops, bookstores, record stores, jewelry store, all sorts of interesting stuff. And I would say like every third or fourth storefront was a coffee shop. So once again, this is a big part of the culture there. We also found awesome food over on that side of town. You can see the grilled chicken wings, the ever-present tomato and cucumber salad, the pide, which is similar to a pizza, but oftentimes they will not have cheese and they will almost always have meat. And we had some doner, which is kind of Turkey's version of shawarma. So I think this one was made out of lamb, and of course different kinds of flat breads.
Wow. Wonderful.
While we were over in Kadikoy on the Asian side, we just wandered into a cafeteria for lunch, and nobody in there was speaking any English, so we felt pretty good about that it was going to be good, good authentic Turkish stuff. And the Turkish pilaf and beans is very traditional in Istanbul. Again, salad. And many of the pide are kind of eye-shaped, and this one was too big for the plate, so they took the pointy ends and stacked them on top. But again, it's similar to like a thin crust pizza dough that's kind of folded over the edges, and then it's kind of some chopped tomato and chopped meat, and it's delicious. We did eat a good amount of kebabs. From what I understand, when a lot of people from other parts of Turkey started moving to Istanbul in the 60s and 70s, they brought kebabs with them. So kebabs weren't a huge thing in Istanbul until somewhat recently, but they're delicious. This particular one, I think it was beef and lamb seasoned with pistachio. So it was really good. And then we went to the All Baklava restaurant. I didn't know there were 45 or 50 types of baklava, but guess what? There's 45 or 50 different types of baklava.
Oh, that sounds good.
So yeah, some of them are the traditional walnut. So you can get, when I think of baklava, I think of, the phyllo dough and walnuts with like honey or sugar syrup.
Yes.
But there's, round ones. There's these ones that have the green dyed wrappers, and some of them are stuffed with pistachios. So you have ones that look like egg rolls and ones that look like wontons. And this one where we said, yeah, we want one of those. So he took the top off, cut a piece of ice cream, stuck it in the middle, and put the top back on. I'm like, baklava with ice cream in the middle? That's amazing.
That sounds really good.
Yes. So yes, definitely ate my way through the beautiful city of Istanbul. So yeah, just some highlights. I didn't want to keep people here all night with a travel log, but So yeah, that's a lot of what I saw there.
Wonderful.
So how many of your group that went to Ghana from Indiana went to Istanbul? Did you all go or?
No, no, I was the onlyest one.
Oh, the
So-
only Istanbul. Oh, good for
I
you.
was the onlyest one. So so the original plan for our group was to go to Northern Ireland.
Right,
And
right.
so they told us when we started the program, beginning of last year, our international travel is going to be to Northern Ireland. Then in March of this year, our director, who is honestly the most enthusiastic person I know, she brings us together and she says, "Pastors, our trip to Northern Ireland is off because we're going to Ghana instead." And I just went, "Oh, okay. Um, all right." But
And
anyway,
then you did
what,
your best to embrace that.
yes, yes. And because originally what they were saying was when we go to Ireland, the program will pay for a ticket to get you there and a ticket to get you home. They don't care if before the trip or after the trip you go somewhere else. So people were saying, "Oh, well, if I'm already all the way over in Ireland, I'm going to go to wherever else in Europe."
Mhm.
And then they said, "We're actually going to Africa." And one of my best friends lives in Jordan. And I thought, I'm already all the way over on the other side of the ocean. I should see if I can get together with him. So as it turns out, he was actually moving to London because his wife was starting a doctoral program and needed to be there for the first year of the program. And he said, "I'm commuting back and forth between London and the Middle East. So why don't we meet in Istanbul? Because Istanbul airport is the world's most connected airport. They have the most direct flights to other countries." And he said, "So, I'll fly there, take a couple days layover there, and finish my trip back to Jordan." So I went to Istanbul the last night we were all in Africa. I just left early and they brought me to the airport. As it turns out, I'm glad that happened because they delayed the
Yeah.
flight from Ghana to New York, and they delayed it so much that everybody was going to miss their connecting flights back to Chicago, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. So they ended up all having to spend a night in a hotel in New York and then get up at 0 dark 30 to get back to the airport and hop on the first flight in the morning to get home.
Wow.
And I just said to myself, "Self, I'm going to be passed out on this plane between Accra and Istanbul. And while they're getting to their hotel room in New York, I'm going to be drinking Turkish coffee." So
Oh, that's
ev-
awesome.
everybody did make it home safe. I kept getting the text messages from everybody.
Mhm.
But I was thankful that that did not affect me.
I'm so glad you were able to do that and work that out. That it sounds like the Istanbul edition was a great addition, and that was your
Yes.
first trip there, right?
Yep.
Was
Mhm.
yeah, awesome.
Yep.
That was just
So
awesome.
yes, so glad I had the opportunity to go. Really glad I had the opportunity to go to Ghana. It is not a place that was on my radar of where I really would like to go. So I'm glad that we went. And you will hear much, much, much more about that next week.
Can't wait.
See, now you know why your director was so excited when she said you're going to Ghana.
She was so enthusiastic. It rubbed off on the rest of us. Um, and it's a genuine enthusiasm. I think we all know people who are good at kind of putting on that face, but you can tell when it's not, when they don't really feel it. Oh no, she feels it at 100%.
It's good.
So wonderful. Well, I think we will go ahead and call it a night. We'll be back here for some time with my trip to Ghana next week. And then the week following that, I think we're going to start a couple sessions on the Reformation. So that is my That is my plan. Would someone be willing to say the Lord's Prayer on behalf of the group?
And if you like,
Yes, please do.
our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you everyone for your attentiveness and your passion for studying the Word as we work through this challenging book of Scripture. And thank you for your interest in seeing a little bit of what I saw in Turkey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor.
You are
Thank you.
very
Thanks for
welcome.
sharing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thanks very much.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
We'll see everyone soon. Take care.